He was a billionaire, respected, untouchable, living in a world where money solved every problem. But on one unforgettable night, his fortune, his pride, and his power weren't enough to protect him. As whispers of racism and injustice circled around him, the last person he ever thought would step forward did. A homeless black man, ignored by society, uttered just 3 words that shattered the billionaire's world and exposed a truth money could never hide. What happened next would change them both forever. For Alexander Grant, life had always been defined by power. He wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the richest men in the city, a billionaire whose name appeared in headlines and whose decisions shaped markets. His world was polished glass towers, private jets, and rooms full of people who always wanted something from him. To outsiders, it looked perfect. But behind the iron gates of his estate, Alexander's life was unraveling. The deal he had spent years building was collapsing under whispers of corruption, accusations of discrimination, and public outrage. Reporters circled like vultures, and for the first time Alexander felt something he couldn't control: fear. His empire, his reputation, and his future, all of it was slipping through his hands. And then came the night that would change everything. Exhausted and desperate, he left the marble halls of his office and stumbled through the city streets, far from the polished image he had built. There, in the shadows, where no cameras followed and no bodyguards stood, he crossed paths with someone he never would have looked at twice before, a man society ignored, left behind and cast aside. A homeless black man sitting quietly on a broken bench would become the mirror Alexander never expected to face. Alexander moved quickly through the darkened streets, the expensive cut of his tailored suit now wrinkled, his polished shoes scuffing against the uneven pavement. He hadn't walked this far in years. Chauffeurs and limousines had always shielded him from these blocks. But tonight, stripped of his pride and surrounded by shadows, he was just another man trying to escape the weight of his failures. On the corner sat a figure, hunched beneath a threadbare blanket. His skin was dark, his hair streaked with gray, and his hands scarred from years of hard labor and harder living. To most passers-by, he was invisible, another nameless man the world had abandoned. But when Alexander's frustration spilled into the night air in the form of a broken whisper, "I can't fix this. It's over." The man lifted his head. "I can fix it," the stranger said, his voice steady but rough. Alexander froze. For a moment he almost laughed at the absurdity. A billionaire on the brink of ruin being offered advice by a man who didn't even have a bed. But something in the man's eyes stopped him. There was no mockery there, only truth, the kind forged by survival. Against his instincts, Alexander sat down on the cold bench. For the first time in years, he was face to face with someone who expected nothing from him. No contracts, no deals, just raw honesty. The man introduced himself as David. He told Alexander about losing his job years ago after standing up against racist treatment at a construction site. His foreman had humiliated him in front of the crew, mocking his skin color and denying him fair pay. When David spoke up, he was fired the next day. No lawyer would take his case. No one cared. From there, one setback followed another until the streets became his only home. As Alexander listened, something stirred in him, a shame he couldn't name. The billionaire who built towers had never thought about the men who built them brick by brick. The power he wielded had shielded him, but for David, that same power had destroyed everything. Still, Alexander pushed back. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This isn't about a job, this is billions, reputation, legacy." David cut him off with quiet firmness. "Money can build walls, but those walls can trap you. Respect, justice, dignity, that's what lasts. You don't need to fix your empire. You need to fix yourself." The words hit Alexander harder than any business loss. For the first time, someone wasn't afraid to strip away the illusion he lived behind. And though he didn't want to admit it, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Because deep down he knew David was right. But before Alexander could respond, a group of young men turned the corner. Their laughter echoed off the buildings, sharp and cruel. One of them spotted David. "Look at this trash," he sneered, pointing. "Begging again?" They hadn't noticed Alexander yet, but they would. And what happened next would test both, men in ways neither expected. The laughter grew louder as the group closed in, circling David like vultures. One of them shoved his shoulder, sending his blanket tumbling to the ground. "Pathetic. Still out here? You'll never be more than a beggar." Alexander's chest tightened. He had spent his life in boardrooms where words cut sharper than knives, but this was raw cruelty. David didn't flinch. He stood tall, meeting their eyes with quiet defiance. Years of hardship had already taken everything from him. What more could they take? Then it happened. One of the men spat at his feet and snarled, "People like you don't belong here." The words dripped with venom, heavy with a history Alexander had never been forced to confront. Suddenly, it wasn't just David they were mocking. It was every struggle, every injustice he had carried on his back. Alexander wanted to step in, to shout, to throw his wealth in their faces like a shield. But for the first time in his life, money meant nothing. He wasn't a billionaire here. He was just another man, frozen in a world he had never truly seen. The group shoved David again, harder this time, knocking him against the bench. His body shook, but his voice remained steady. "You think I'm nothing," he said softly, "but I've survived more than you can imagine. You can't take my dignity." The words sliced through the night like a blade. The young men paused, their smirks faltering. Even Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. But tension still crackled in the air, dangerous and unpredictable. The next move could change everything. Violence, silence, or something entirely unexpected. And as Alexander finally stepped forward, his heart pounding, one question burned in his mind. Would this be the moment he stayed silent like always? Or the moment he finally stood for something greater than himself? The group eventually scattered, their cruelty echoing in the night like a bitter aftertaste. David stooped to gather his blanket, his hands trembling but his spirit unbroken. Alexander bent down to help, their eyes meeting for the first time, not as a billionaire and a homeless man, but as two human beings. That single moment of dignity, David refusing to let hatred define him, shook Alexander more than any boardroom battle ever could. He had spent his life chasing power, wealth, and respect, but all it took was a man society had discarded to show him what real strength looked like. In the days that followed, Alexander couldn't let it go. The mocking voices haunted him, but so did David's words. "You can't take my dignity." He realized he had the means to change more than just his world. Quietly, without press releases or grand announcements, he began using his resources to create programs for the homeless, to fight the very system that had left men like David invisible. But the true impact wasn't measured in money. It was in the shift of perspective. Alexander's life was no longer about how high he could climb, but about how many he could lift. And David? His courage that night became more than survival. It became a spark. A reminder that even the smallest voice, when steady and unshaken, can challenge the cruelty of the world. And so the story lingers with us, because this wasn't just about one billionaire or one homeless man. It was about the question we all must face. When confronted with injustice, do we stay silent or do we finally stand up?